Okay, what do we got? We got a quality control related sim. All right, so this one also is pretty straightforward. We're simply going to understand what element is being described within the description for this specific CPA firm. All right, we remember that quality control is a rule book, right? The system of quality control is going to be this framework that is consistent of policies and procedures for the audit firm to abide by. Right, we think of internal controls on the management side, right? Management system of internal controls is what we, the auditor, are assessing, and that is outlined by the COSO framework. Think of the auditor's internal controls as similar to this quality control framework. We want to make sure that the audit firm is doing business in a manner that is acceptable by the professional standards setting body. All right, so we got to remember Palmer CPA PC, and this is going to consist of the 6 elements of quality control standards. Okay, and anybody can remember the 6 elements of quality control. But this sim is testing your ability to think critically about the characteristics of each of those elements. Okay, so starting with this first description. The firm establishes policies and procedures to minimize the likelihood of associating with a client whose management lacks integrity. Okay, so anytime you're thinking about a client minimizing the likelihood of associating with a client whose management lacks integrity, we got to think about the A in Palmer. Okay, before we accept a client, we want to make sure that we're not associating ourselves with somebody shady, right? Somebody who's going to get us in trouble. Okay, so your buzzword for client acceptance and engagement continuance is going to be minimize likelihood. Okay, because the 2 primary factors that they love to test related to client acceptance and engagement continuance consist of minimizing the likelihood of associating with a client whose management lacks integrity and determining whether or not the audit firm can perform the engagement. Okay, so obviously this is going to be one of these 2 primary factors. Next up, Huntington places an emphasis on quality within an engagement. Okay, so this has to do with the P in our Palmer mnemonic. At the end of the day, performance of the engagement has to do with quality, right? We want to make sure that we're supervising the engagement. We have to make sure that we are providing solutions for issues that arise. Okay, so at the end of the day, an emphasis on quality has to do with the performance of the engagement element of quality control. Okay, so company policies state that if necessary, the engagement staff should reperform quality reviews. So this is consistent of having an ongoing monitoring of quality review. So this falls within our M in our Palmer mnemonic, right? So monitoring will often include the reperformance of the client's engagement quality control reviews. Okay, so next up, conflicting opinions between audit engagement personnel is promptly resolved with an acceptable solution. Okay, so again, this falls within the characteristics of performance of the engagement. If an audit firm has conflicts of interest or differences in opinion, then they need to be able to provide solutions for those situations. Okay, so again, important to note that this has to do with performance of the engagement. Okay, so the company outlines policies and procedures for reviewing the qualification of its team members in order to staff appropriate personnel on certain engagements based on their skill set. All right, so we got to remember that human resources is more than just hiring and firing people, right? It's more than just onboarding personnel. It also has to do with staffing. Okay, so when I think about human resources, I think about Nancy. Nancy was the first person that ever hired me. She was the director of human resources at my first job. Nancy was a great lady, but Nancy also did more than just hire people. She was also responsible for ensuring that staff was assigned to certain engagements based on their appropriate skill set. Right? It was up to her to make sure that an entry-level new hire wasn't managing a new large engagement. Okay, so human resources is a very important department, and it is one of the 6 elements of quality control, and this is one of their roles and functions. Okay, so next up, Huntington allocates a portion of its budget toward implementing quality control systems. This falls within leadership responsibilities, the L in our Palmer mnemonic. Okay, so one of the key characteristics is the firm should commit a selected amount of their budget towards the integration of the development and the deployment of quality control systems. So next up, prior to accepting an engagement, the firm's policies suggest that they first evaluate significant threats to independence. Okay, so when you're thinking about ethical requirements, the E in our Palmer mnemonic, you're thinking sort of similar to what we discussed within the Code of Professional Conduct, right? That's the framework for the audit professional, all right? Because we're thinking about the independence rules. Okay, so when you're thinking about independence and the Code of Professional Conduct, this is also going to flow into the quality control framework. And it's going to do so within the E in our Palmer mnemonic. All right, so within ethical responsibilities. Okay, so that's why this is the best description.